Hi there, everybody. Welcome. We're so glad you could be here with us today. Welcome to the Mass Literacy Getting Started series. We're glad you could join us today to learn more about and go deeper with the evidence-based practices within the Mass Literacy Guide. I'm Donna Goldstein, an ELA Literacy Content Support Lead here at DESE. Mass Literacy Getting Started has been a six-part series designed to support users in accessing specific areas within the Mass Literacy Guide. Today is our final session, and like those prior sessions that we've had, it will feature an experienced educator speaking directly to their use of evidence-based practices and connecting this work to the Mass Literacy Guide. Today's focus area is around leading a multi-tiered system of support. Welcome back to those of you who have been joining us each week. We really appreciate that. And a special hello to those of you who are joining us for the first time today. You can find a recording of today's section within about a week or so on the Mass Literacy Guide landing page right under the Top Resources section. The recordings of all prior Mass Literacy Guide webinars are there as well and include sessions on foundational skills instruction, supports and information for engaging with complex text and language development, and resources and instruction for students experiencing reading difficulties. Please note, however, that we do not give PDPs. Tomorrow, you will receive an email confirming your attendance at today's 45-minute webinar. A link to a central document that contains all of the resources being referenced and shared today is being dropped into the chat for you right now. This document also includes the link to the top resources section that I just mentioned a moment ago. As you know, today's session is being recorded. If you do have a question, please use the question and answer feature. We will be monitoring that and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. And keep in mind, a page with a sequential list of all of the resource titles and links referenced in today's presentation, including the top resources section where the video recordings are posted. This was just dropped in the chat for you right now, so you can follow along with those links. We're going to start today with a brief introduction and an overview of today's focus area, while most of the time will be for our featured speaker, Brent Conway. After Brent presents, we'll have some question and answer time with my DESE colleague, Susan Kazeroid. For those of you who are new to the Mass Literacy Guide, it's a statewide effort to empower educators with the evidence-based practices for literacy that all students need. Evidence-based instruction provided within classrooms that are culturally responsive and sustaining will put our youngest students on a path toward literacy for life. As part of this work, over the next several years, DESE will offer early literacy programming paired with implementation supports, including resources, professional development, and grants. Right now, you're looking at a screenshot of the Mass Literacy Guide landing page. We have a great video, which is a centerpiece right there, as you can see. And that features classroom teachers, specialists, and a couple of the researchers who advised on this work. Lots and lots of voices, perspectives, and expertise contributed. The featured speakers in this particular video were among the 100 plus stakeholders who advised. We engaged with researchers from across the country and internationally, along with Massachusetts preschool teachers, elementary teachers, administrators, and educator preparation faculty. DESE also partnered with the Mass Reading Association and collaborated with the Mass Association of School Administrators, specifically working with a group of assistant superintendents. I just want to point out that you can also see the Mass Reading Association logo right at the bottom right of the landing page there. I've circled it in red for you. In terms of layout and how you access it, the Mass Literacy Guide is made up of 5 primary sections that are all accessible via this landing page. You can either use the left-hand navigation over here, or you can go by these tiles that I'm going to walk you through right now. The 5 sections include components of the core literacy block, skills for early reading, excuse me, students experiencing reading difficulties, pathway to equity and early literacy, and leading a multi-tiered system of support, which is the focus of today's section. It's circled in red for you right here on the slide. Our featured speaker, Brent Conway, will be sharing his experience in supporting evidence-based tiered instruction in just a few minutes. Brent will also connect some of his ideas to the simple view of reading and talk about how this informs his leadership. An informational page on the simple view of reading is located within the Skills for Early Reading section, which I have indicated or highlighted right here for you beneath this red arrow. So we're taking a look at the Leading a Multi-Tiered System of Support landing page. This section is particularly relevant for literacy coaches, principals, administrators, and curriculum coordinators. The intent of this section is to describe the school-wide systems that are required for multi-tiered supports to function. This section also has a heavy emphasis on assessment and using informative assessment to make instructional decisions. The components here are represented in gears to show that all of these components fit together like a well-oiled machine working around a team. The information and resources that Brent will speak to today are all connected to two areas on this page specifically. Here at the scheduling, staffing, and materials section, and also over here at the data-based decision-making page. If you joined us last week for the session on students experiencing reading difficulties, you may recall that we spent some time here at the database decision-making page talking about the importance of assessment for early identification and prevention of reading difficulty. At this page, you can find guidance and resources for assessment to inform instruction. Brent will also speak to resources and information on that page today. So now that you know where we're going and we have some context for today's session, let's get ready to meet our featured speaker. We are so pleased to have Brent Conway here to share about his experience with evidence-based practice leading within a multi-tiered system of support. Brent is an assistant superintendent in the Pentucket Regional School District in West Newbury, Massachusetts. Brent has served as a literacy champion, one of about 50 educators, primarily teachers with some administrators, Brent being one of them, from across the Commonwealth that were deeply, deeply involved in advising DESE about the Mass Literacy Guide. He also contributed to the development of the Mass Dyslexia Law Guidelines for school districts and is a founding member of the North Shore Literacy Leaders Group, working to help build professional knowledge and dialogue around evidence-based practices. Brent recently spoke to the Mass Board of Education on the state's work with early literacy and has presented at various conferences. He serves on advisory boards for curriculum and professional development organizations and companies, frequently speaking to organizations and schools, and provides professional development on implementing tier literacy systems, among other topics. He is passionate about early literacy and has so much to share. We're very excited to have him with us today. We appreciate his time and expertise. After he presents, we will have some question and answer time with Brent, facilitated by my DESE colleague, Susan Kazeroid. So Brent, I am going to stop sharing my screen, welcome you, and invite you to share your screen. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Donna. Appreciate all that. Yeah, so I'll share my screen. I have some slides for you today. We'll work through some of those, and we can proceed from there. So as Donna said, this is about leading a multi-tiered system of support, but specifically a system of tiered literacy. And the system side of all of this is maybe somewhat different from some of the other conversations that have occurred in all of these sessions, because this ends up being a sort of a bigger picture approach of how you take all those other components, your curriculum resources, your evidence-based practices, your professional development, your data, your assessments, all of that together, and do it across a bigger picture, either grade level or a whole school, in order to create a system where we can ensure we're getting kids everything that they need when they need it to help them make the growth they need. So as Donna said, I am the assistant superintendent currently in the Pentucket Regional School District. I'll tell you a little bit more about a few other things, but we probably have a variety of audience members with us today, administrators, some teachers, potentially parents as well. Is this what your schedule looks like, right? If this is what your schedule looks like, we're all sort of in the same boat. We're trying to make a lot of things work and make a lot of things happen within our school schedule. And one of our greatest resources is time, but it's also our greatest barrier. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But the schedule component of it is really, really critical. And I use this sort of as a humorous point about it. So a little bit about me. For 7 years, I was a principal at Lincoln Elementary School in Melrose from 2007 to 2015. I spent 4 years as a middle school principal in Melrose as well. And then I've been here in Pentucket now. This is my 3rd year. At Lincoln is really where my work and my experience started with tiered systems, particularly around literacy. We ended up implementing a tiered system. It was an approach year by year. We built on it. The schedule was one of the key things, assessment systems, and then that professional development and teacher knowledge came into play. Lincoln School was a 3-time Massachusetts Commendation School, and then ended up being a National Blue Ribbon School as well for closing achievement gaps for students. In Pentucket, we've done a lot of similar work, and obviously the pandemic getting in the way of things a little bit, but we've continued to do a lot of work. We're part of the early literacy grant here in Pentucket, and the teacher knowledge is really building and expanding and the dissemination of that knowledge. But we also changed our schedules and assessment practices just over the last so many years, and we continue to build on that. We'll highlight a few of those things. Donna mentioned sort of that landing page for the tiered systems really has those gears in it, and they do all really work together. I think that's critical. So leading an MTSS system brings you there. And a lot of it is that schedules and staffing and database decision-making. There's one thing, if you're sort of new to the concept of MTSS from a literacy perspective, or even like RTI, response to instruction or intervention, within the instruction link, there is a video by Massachusetts' own Dr. Katie Novak, where she talks about the dentist analogy. And that dentist analogy is really pretty important. So the tiers are not locations is a great video there. It's short, it's on YouTube. I really encourage everyone to get to that. I might go back to this screen as we proceed here. So what I want to do is bring you to a visual. We talked about the simple view of reading. And this really is, this talks about the simple view of reading. If it's a visual about it, on the Mass Literacy site, there's a link where you would go. It's under the skilled reading component. And they talk to you in detail about what the simple view and the research behind it. But just for a quick basis, this is how we base a lot of what we do. This is thinking of reading comprehension as the outcome. And it's the outcome of the 2 other components that we build up to. So that decoding and that word reading component, the ability for students to apply speech to print and decode words, and then the language comprehension side of it. And that's oral language, not reading comprehension, but language comprehension and the ability to understand what that spoken word is. And those are our 2 components. And actually, if you take that whole visual and you turn it on its side, it actually looks like the reading rope, Scarborough's rope, where you have the language strands on the top part and the word reading on the bottom. And then the outcome, when they all come together, is reading comprehension. When you put a system in place around this, I have a visual that I use to help people understand that. And it's the simple view of implementing a tiered system for teaching literacy. And you know, we spend a lot of time focusing often on the instruction and curriculum side of things, the instruction routines, the evidence-based practices, differentiate instruction, those 5 components, direct, systematic, explicit, all those things, and that professional development around that. We spend a lot of time on that. There's a whole nother part to implementing this and making all of that be effective. And that's the systems and structure side. So the schedules, the personnel management, your screening and assessment data, your diagnostic protocols, your progress monitoring, all those things together. When you have those together, you end up with a system where we can really reach all students. And I think that the key thing to remember about both of these visuals is these are multiplication problems. And anything we know about math is anything times 0 is 0. So we can have the best instruction and curriculum in a classroom. But if we don't have the systems and structures in place to really maximize it, the outcome won't be this. We'll have a lot of holes in making sure that we're delivering this. And then on the flip side, if we do a great job getting the right assessments in and we have a system in place to analyze it and we've got a schedule in place, but the teachers don't have the knowledge that they need and the tools that they're using don't match that, then the outcome won't be there either. So it's a nice sort of an easy way to think that there's two components. And I think for the most part, and this is generalizing, the instruction and curriculum side of it becomes a teacher component. That's the educator delivering that component. And yes, it's the administrator's responsibility to make sure they get them the tools they need in the PD, but the teachers enact this. The systems and structures side, that's really an administrative function, really setting up that schedule to maximize all of that and to use all of those components, right? And if we were to think about going back, that's just this visual right here. Talk about schedules and staffing and materials and database decision-making. That's in the system side of it over there. The literacy leadership team helping to drive that. And then you have your professional learning and instruction. And that's the other side. That's that curriculum and support and actual instruction. So a lot of it all, it just matches up pretty well, okay? So thinking a little bit about what all this does in a system approach is there's a great book out of Kennewick, Washington called Annual Growth for All and Catch-Up Growth for Those Who Are Behind. And when I was in Melrose as a principal there, that became, we read that, all of our staff read that one summer, and that became a mantra to us. And what that means is if we have a child who starts a year at a certain pace, we expect everyone to grow an entire year's worth of growth in the year. But if a child starts a half a year behind, and they also grow a year, it's wonderful growth, but they're still a half a year behind. And the concept of a tiered system is you need to have catch-up growth. And you need to tier your supports to give the right supports and the right quantity and the proper amount of supports to the kids who are behind. George Batch, Dr. George Batch, he's out of the University of South Florida. He talks about the important components, and I've sort of adapted some things from him. He's sort of an RTI guru, and you know, RTI more response to instruction, not necessarily intervention, but in a tiered system, we need a building schedule and a data system that allows for any one of these 6 important levers to be pulled. And really what we're talking about is if we have kids who need catch-up growth, there's basically 6 ways to do this. We can give them more instructional time in class, either with a WIN or intervention block, a smaller instructional group. We can give them more precisely and targeted skills. So that's data informed. We need the right assessment tools to tell us what it is they need to work on. They need more systematic instruction and sequences. So we have to make sure we have the right tools in place. More guided practice, more attention from adults, that I do, we do, you do model. And then more opportunities for error correction and feedback to avoid those bad habits, right? And those are the levers. And what you want to do is have a building schedule in place and a data system that allows you to pull any one of those levers and let the data tell you which one to pull for kids. And how you set that schedule up can be really critically important. There's some great tools here. For instance, at the University of Oregon, their whole school model, there is a link here that brings you there. It is phenomenal. It gives you a lot of information about how to do that in scheduling. And then there's some right there on the MTSS site as well. So I think these are fantastic links. Even the Oregon one is built into the Mass Literacy Guide. That is a link that's right there for you. So that's all built in there. And that's under the scheduling, staffing, and materials. So it's a great tool for you to go to. There's slide decks and different tools in there that can help you as a leader understand how you might lead a team of people through that work. So this is my approach in scheduling is to prioritize the schedule for literacy, particularly at K-3 in elementary schools. So conceptually, there's a few models that you can think about, and there's a lot of variables and a grade level schedule, but we really need to prioritize that literacy instruction and start by establishing what is the minimum amount of time you're going to dedicate to a literacy instruction block at each grade. And it might be a K to 1 and 2, might be 120 minutes, maybe 3 to 5, it might be 90 minutes or something. And we all know that, in order to do a building schedule, specialists are generally a lot of part of that, because if you can schedule them as common across a grade level, and this is where I've had a lot of experience and our schools have, if we can have all first grade having their specials at the same time every day, then that becomes first grade common planning time. And then it allows you to, the rest of the first grade schedule, to build around that. And if you can have a whole grade level teaching literacy at the same time, you can manage when you have support personnel to go in. So you can flood a grade level. And those are some of the points there. And when you go to the University of Oregon site, they'll talk about a walk to read model. That becomes a really organized model. But even not necessarily walk to read, a staggered grade level, so that the first grade literacy block is all happening at the same time. And then you start the second grade a little bit after it, and you do some staggering of grade levels where you share personnel, whether it's special education personnel, whether it's reading specialists. And the idea is that you can send these people into the classroom when you're doing your small group instruction, not necessarily during a whole group instruction, but when you're doing your small group instruction. That becomes B-grid service delivery. It becomes targeted instruction and targeted work. It becomes really powerful stuff when you can do it that way. And then obviously when you add an intervention block that's after that or outside of that, you get additional time for those kids. So the kids who are furthest behind get more targeted support, because you're flooding that with grade level, you're flooding a grade level with personnel, and you have an additional win block if you need that as well too. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. There's different models, but more or less it's a good sort of conceptual idea to work around to try to make that happen. And the assessment drives this. So your assessment should really align to the simple view. So we go back to what are those components that really lead to reading comprehension. And it is that word reading components and the language component. So those are the things we should be screening for. And screenings are meant to be very quick and simple. And you want to get a nice quick overview that looks at those particular details, whether it's phonemic awareness, decoding, early decoding skills, phonemic segmentation, and then into fluency. But you also want to look at your oral language. What are kids' vocabulary skills like at grade level, for instance, and what are students' language comprehension? And then once students really master those and they start to move on, they proceed. This here is just a visual from our screening assessment sort of overview of what we do in Pentucket, and we're still tweaking and turning this. There's a great link on the Mass Literacy site that talks about intensive intervention, but screenings. And these are screening tools that you can do. We have a whole nother set. So after you screen, sometimes you need a drill down assessment, another tool to give you a little bit more information about a student who might be behind, because you want to target that skill. And then you need another set of diagnostics that actually, in the event that you're really you might be assessing for special education evaluation and really designing an IEP that targets what those needs are. So it's important to have all of those components. And this tool right here is built right in. It's a wonderful tool on the Mass Literacy site. So let that data drive the conversation. And this is what we have done. And, if you have screening assessments, I use this phrase all the time, we cannot intervene our way out of a tier 1 problem. If we use our screening assessments and 50% of our students, for example, are below grade level with decoding, intervention's not going to fix that. We need to fix that at the tier 1 level, right? So this data can really inform our overall instruction, and then it can inform what we do with specific students as well. So in a tiered system, you have those screeners. There's early literacy screeners that are all approved by DESE recently, which is a fantastic link. Those are great to use. I highly suggest you get in there and use those or take a look at it. And then you have a variety of diagnostic assessments. I kind of spoke about that too. And if you're trying to think about how you take that assessment data and triangulate it into making decisions, again, from the mass literacy site, Hill for Literacy has a whole tool, an outline about how you would do that. And we have ours that we utilize as well, where what we're really doing is assessing to the point of breakdown. So if someone, well, they're not comprehending well. Okay, why aren't they comprehending? Well, they don't seem to understand what it is that they're reading. Okay, are they reading fluently? Well, no, they're really not a fluent reader. Okay, let's keep going. Why aren't they fluent? Are they decoding words? Are they accurate when they, no, they're making a lot of mistakes. Okay, so now let's look at their decoding. And eventually you get to a point where the breakdown is, and now you know where they need the instruction. And if those numbers are big, then it can be fixed in tier 1. And if they're smaller, then we can put those kids together based on that. That's what some of the tools from Hill, they help provide you do that and get you a real sense of how to do that. And then data meetings. And this is where you have some of these conversations. These were some examples that were in there, the sorting charts. So there's a grade 1 sorting chart. So once you have that data, now you're going to sort your kids, and you can sort it by classroom. You could potentially sort it by grade level, especially if you have some shared personnel. And the Mass Literacy Guide has a fantastic, these are slide decks around those database decision making. So this is a great for a literacy team, for instance, to look at, and then how we might advise our teachers in going through a data meeting. We use something very similar to this in Pentucket. And it's a whole protocol and process about how you do it. And it's highly effective. And these tools here, for instance, if you were to open this just gives you a quick visual of something that we use, for instance. So this would be 2nd and 3rd grade, and we would sort the kids into 4 categories using the assessment data that we have. And the students who are the furthest behind have deficits in multiple areas, and the students over here don't. And then the students in these other quadrants have deficits in more precise areas. So using that, we can go back and we can target our instruction, right? And this one here is more precise. This is 1st grade. We've adapted this a little bit, but this is, there's one very similar to this on the Mass Literacy site that connects. And this is about 1st grade, for instance, and it talks about the stages of getting students to blend. So this becomes really precise, and we're able to target our instruction when we use the data this way. So. And, you know, sort of in summary, there's some major drivers here in a tiered system. And the critical ones are the shared beliefs. So a common belief that all special education students are general ed students first. And by that, I mean that those special education students should be serviced and should be able to have access to that tier 1 classroom instruction. And then what they need beyond that is in addition to, not in place of. A common belief or shared ownership of all students. So there's no, this person is that person's student, this student is that person. No, we all do it. We're all working on the data, and then who is supporting that kid is sort of like the last thing we worry about. And tiers are not locations. They're descriptors for the intensity, type, or format of support that a student needs. And that's really, oh, we don't say that's a tier 3 student. No, that is a student who is in need of tier 3 supports or intervention. And it describes how intense we might provide that or what format, all right? And then from a systems perspective, what we're trying to do is build schedules and have data systems that were built for that annual growth and catch-up growth so that we can close some of those achievement gaps for students. Right. Schedules that allow for the best use of personnel that prioritizes literacy instruction. So if you can move personnel, I know for us, if we have 3 1st grades and we have maybe 65 kids, for 45 minutes when they're doing small group instruction, we can flood that with almost 9 professionals, either 7 to 9 adults who can flood that grade level. So all those kids are getting a lot of direct and explicit instruction. And then you need data that really helps you to assess to the point of breakdown and doesn't just provide broad levels without skill specificity. What you need to be able to do to make this growth is really understand where they are at. And I think that's about it. Donna, you popped on. It's like on cue. We're ready, right? This is how to contact me. If anyone ever, I'm happy to do more. This is like, we're like rapid fire. We could do a whole day with a lot of this stuff, and I'm happy to help folks. You can follow me on Twitter if you want, right? Boost my Twitter followers.
Thank you, Brent. That was very thorough. There are just so many pieces to consider when you think about supporting literacy within a multi-tiered system of support. And I think that was really helpful in showing us specific locations within the guide that people could go to for some support there. Really appreciate your sharing your expertise with that. So if you could stop sharing your screen, I'm gonna go back to sharing mine. And then I just have to be able to do that. Sorry, everyone. Okay, we're back. Okay, back to sharing my screen. And we're going to move on to take some questions. My DESE colleague, Susan Kazarite, Susan was deeply involved in the development of the Mass Literacy Guide, is going to run this question and answer session. And after Susan and Brent chat, it'll come back to me and we will close out with a couple of resources to further support your use of the Mass Literacy Guide and a survey link. So Susan, Brent, it's all you.
Great. Thank you, Donna and Brent. Thank you so much. You gave us so much to think about. I was feverishly taking notes myself here as you were speaking. We do have a few questions. So one of the questions is, you mentioned that you're flooding a grade. You have the ability to flood a grade level with adults. Who are the adults that you're flooding the grade level with? What are their positions? How does that work?
Yeah, so that would vary, right? And obviously every building's level of supports are different, and every district. So number one, obviously we have you have 3 first grade teachers or something to that effect. We might have a paraprofessional in the mix there. We probably have a special ed teacher who is doing the inclusion special ed work. And we might, for instance, might have a speech language pathologist. So, or you might have an OT, or you might have another paraprofessional. And a special ed teacher might do multiple grade levels, but for instance, we're going to use that small group time of the literacy instruction, and that's when that B grid service would be. And then they're going to work with groups of kids for 15 or 20 minutes in a small group, targeting specific work. So, and you might have a reading specialist, for instance, and trying to ensure that we enhance and intensify the in-class instruction with as many people as we can. And then some of those kids may need additional stuff too, outside of that.
Great, thank you. So a follow-up to that is, so you are, as you're flooding, how are you providing collaboration for those staff members in order to collaborate around the instruction being given?
So if you build that schedule that way, then all the first grades, for instance, have their specials at the same time, and then that becomes the first grade common planning time. Some of you have bigger buildings, so you might have 6 or 8 or 9 classrooms at a grade level, and you probably you don't have 9 places to send all the first graders, for instance, but you might be able to do it by clusters, right? So a cluster of first grade and another cluster, so maybe it's 4 classrooms, for instance. So you might want to be able to break it down into chunks that way, to think that way. So, and I think some of the common time for like the special ed teacher to plan with them, not always there. We have data meetings 3 times a year that are full data meetings. And then we try to have mid-cycle data meetings that are less intensive. But those are times too where everyone sort of talks about what kids need and what a focus is in a small group. So those are flexible in what kids need, how that works.
Thank you, Brent. You had this great catchphrase, access to the point of breakdown. Could you talk a little bit more about what you mean by access to the point of breakdown?
Yeah, so assess to the point of breakdown, in the sense of using assessment tools, screener tools, that give us a good picture of the skills that are measured that are predictive measures of reading proficiency. And what we want to be able to do is sort of keep assessing. So sort of go in that sequence, right? So if their fluency is not strong, why? Is it an accuracy or is it a speed issue, right? Are they doing automaticity issue? Well, if it's accuracy, all right, now we got to really look at their decoding. And if it's not their decoding, if their decoding isn't really strong, let's look at their phonemic awareness. So really trying to work to where that breakdown is. and then group kids based on that breakdown. And that's where they're getting that additional focus instruction, either whether it's intervention or whether it's the teacher giving that additional instruction, for instance. And just assessing to the point of breakdown and grouping kids that way based on skills.
Great, thanks, Brent. Kind of a follow-up to that two-part question. Number one, what do effective tier 2 interventions look like? And when you mentioned the small group in the class, so the students who aren't working with teachers, what's happening for them?
Yeah, so I think tier 2 interventions could vary depending upon what it is that you're focusing on, right? Do the students need to improve their fluency? Do they need to improve their decoding? So it varies what it looks like. And tier 2 can be done in the classroom. It can be the classroom teacher. It could be the reading teacher coming into the classroom. You know, it's not a location, it's the level of intensity. So you go back to those 6 levers that we talked about, like, are you increasing the amount of time? Are you making the group smaller? Are you giving them more error feedback? And those types of things. So I wouldn't say it's a one size fits all, but some of those kids may need an additional time. So, you know, might be the reading teacher or a reading tutor seeing them outside of the room 3, 4, 5 times a week for 20 or 30 minutes. And it's sort of an intensive going through the sequence. Sometimes it's the same as you delivered in tier 1. It's just done with more intensity. But if the kids have gaps and they're further behind, then they have to sort of go back and work on that, you know. Your other part to the question, what are the other kids doing? Well, so the kids who are doing well on grade level, they're doing more independent or partner work, for instance, but they do get to see adults because you're able to flood the room and the teacher does get to see them. Maybe not every day, but they're probably doing partner reading, for instance. They might be reading, responding to literature that they read. They might be practicing their own decoding and the phonics or phonemic awareness work that was done. They could be doing vocabulary work like Frere model and mapping out some of the words, or morphology work with some of the words that were in the anchor text or in the oral language component. So there's all sorts of things they can do in partners. We do want kids to read out loud actually as much as possible. So when they partner read, that's really critical. So added accountability, right? So they're not all on their own.
Great, thanks, Brent. We probably have time for one more question. And so could you talk about what you think the biggest successes have been in implementing MTSS in your schools?
The biggest successes, I think it is when so I'd always talk about student focus in that we get students who are not feeling like they're doing well, and you're able to sort of close that gap and they feel like they're a lot closer, and they are in fact a lot closer. But then on the teacher side of it, they can see it in the data in addition to feeling like that, they can see it all the time, but then they see it in the data as well. And they see it in individual student data, but then they see it in the big picture. And it becomes that feeling of everyone worked on this together. This was a common goal and effort. And it really builds up the esteem of the teachers, the feeling like they worked to make some progress. It can take some time in a system to get it really cranking, right? But once you get there, the adults feel really good about it and the kids are reading.
Thanks, Brent, so much. We so appreciate it. I'm going to turn it back over to Donna for some closing remarks. And Brent, we're getting some questions that I think would be directed right at you. And you did give your email address. Is it okay if I drop that into
Absolutely.
The chat for any follow-up? Thank you.
Happy to help and share examples and some other things and whatever people want help with. Happy to do so.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Brent. That was really informative. Much, much appreciated. Before we close today's session, we have an upcoming opportunity and also a couple of Mass Literacy Guide resources that we wanted to be sure that you knew about. First of all, the opportunity. The Mass Literacy team is currently working on updating our resources for supporting early literacy instruction for English learners and multilingual learners. We welcome your feedback and your suggestions. We would love to hear it. Please do so if you would like to send some feedback or suggestions. Do it via the Mass Literacy Guide Contact Us box. That link is on the sheet and is being dropped in the chat for you as well. Any feedback or suggestions you have would be much appreciated by April 16th. So thank you very much for that. And the link will be dropped into the chat for you. We also have 2 resources to share that will go along with your Mass Literacy Guide work, implementation, exploration. The first on the left-hand side of the page is the Mass Literacy What to Start page. This is a resource that has been designed to support educators and administrators to get started with using the guide. And it is aligned to 6 evidence-based early literacy practices as kind of like that launching point. Second, on the right-hand side, there's a one-pager that offers suggestions for where to enter the Mass Literacy Guide based upon your role as an educator. So both of these resources are included on the link sheet, and has been dropped in the chat for you throughout today's presentation. Be sure to check out the top resources page for the videos of previous Mass Literacy webinars and to know where today's will be posted. It should be up in about the next week or so. And please, if you would, take a moment to complete the brief survey. The link is being dropped in the chat for you now, so we can be more responsive. These webinars actually came about based upon educator response from the field, that people wanted supports in how to approach and use the guide, and that's really where the inspiration for this series of webinars came from. So please take the survey. The link was just dropped into the chat for you. You may want to click on it now so you have it and you can complete it later on, or just please know you'll also receive a survey reminder email tomorrow at about this time, 24 hours from now. That will have the survey link in it, and you can complete it that way if you'd prefer. Your confirmation of attendance for attending today's 45-minute webinar will be included in that email as well. That's being dropped in the chat and it's on the link page. So we really appreciate your being here today, and special thanks to Brent Conway for sharing. We all learned so much. If you have any further questions or comments, please submit them in the Mass Literacy Contact Us box. The link is on the resource page that had been shared earlier. So everyone, this concludes today's webinar in the Mass Literacy Getting Ready series in general. We really appreciate your being with us for it. Take good care. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.